So welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Planning Professional Development for the New School Year. We're excited not only to introduce our guests, but also to mark this beginning of a new school year that for many NWP sites also marks the beginning of a new professional development partnership. So before we hear from our guests, though, just a few logistics about the webinar space that you're seeing us from. There are, you'll notice, I hope, some resource folders. We have a little feedback. And if you're just listening, when you're not otherwise engaged, if you'll mute your microphone. But I wanted to point out on the webinar page that there are resource folders, and many of you have already discovered the chat role. We'll be talking with our guests, and I'm quite sure you'll hear lots of ideas and maybe information about which you have some questions or might like some additional information. So if you write your comments in the chat role, we'll be able to pick those up and invite our guests to respond. So I wanted, before we hear from our folks, to situate this program and the work that we'll be talking about in a larger context, and that begins with the 40-year history of the National Writing Project, which has always provided high-quality professional development and has always prioritized extending the reach of its programs to serve high-need schools. And many of you are here either because you've been involved in this work, either supported by school or district funds or supported by a seed grant, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the definition of high need that we're using is that's used by the Department of Education, and it designates those schools where 50% or more of the students are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So that's the operating definition. But in the past several years, funded in part by supporting effective educator development grants, what we're calling seed grants from the U.S. Department of Education, over 100 local NWP sites in more than 35 states have been engaged in developing and leading these year-long embedded professional development programs in high-need elementary, middle, and high schools. And this work has been focused on the teaching and learning of writing as part of challenging career and college and career-ready standards. But currently, supported by yet a third round of seed high-need school funding, NWP sites are leading professional development partnerships and at the same time are continuing to create resources that capture the successful strategies and program models and lessons that they've learned from this work. This webinar is just one example of the work that the National Writing Project and its sites have always done, which is to disseminate what we're learning in order to inform and refine and enrich future programming, our own and those of our colleagues across the nation. Seed funding in particular has really helped us to extend the impact of what we're learning and to support sites in extending the reach of their programs to carry out this work intentionally in more places, and at the same time to document effective strategies for producing measurable outcomes in student writing. So as NWP sites across the country are planning for their own professional development partnership work in the coming year, including about 50 of you, many of you probably on this webinar, sites whose work is supported by this new round of seed grants, we've invited 3 site leaders who've been engaged in work with high-need partner schools over the past year to share their program models and successful strategies along with the lessons that they've learned from this work. So with that, I'm pleased to welcome Elizabeth Brockman from Central University Central Michigan University, who's the faculty co-director of the Chippewa River Writing Project in Michigan. Dixie Keys, director of the Arkansas Delta Writing Project at Arkansas State University, and Amy Clark, director of the Appalachian Writing Project at the University of Virginia's College at Wise. So welcome, Liz and Dixie and Amy, and thank you so much for being here. So at this moment, as you know, many sites are gearing up for their work with partner schools in the coming year, and we've invited you here to share what you've learned and are learning about the essential elements of successful professional development partnerships. I think that our audience is probably most curious to hear from you about what they would need or what one would need to know that would lay the foundation for success with this work. So let me pose the question, what are the key ideas and principles that they should be thinking about right now? So if we can, let's start with you, Liz.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking you, Pat, for inviting me to this informal venue. It's an honor to be here, and I want to wish the new seed grant recipients the best of luck in the upcoming year. My name again is Liz Brockman. I'm the co-director of the Chippewa River Writing Project, along with my colleagues Troy Hicks, who also teaches at CMU, and Kathy Kurtze, who teaches at Carson City Middle and High School. We partnered with Hillside Elementary, a 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade elementary school located in Harrison, Michigan, which is about 40 miles north of Central Michigan in a rural, remote, and very poverty-stricken area. In this school, we worked with 7 teachers, a cohort of 7 teachers, who represented collectively all 3 of those grade levels, and 2 of the teachers were SI graduates from our 2013 program. They were rock stars, I'll use that term, in the Summer Institute environment, and we knew they were already teacher leaders and that they would serve as excellent liaisons during the year, and they did exactly that. So just to provide some more context, our grant identified 3 set activities for the year. The first activity was a series of mini courses. The second was VIP passes for our MLK Day Writing Conference. And the third was a conference-style in-service day. And so let me talk about those very briefly one by one. The mini courses, which were really the cornerstone of the grant activities, focused on informative, persuasive, and narrative writing. So we covered the CCSS anchors 1, 2, and 3. They were offered through our global campus, which is the distance learning arm of the university, and they were each worth 1 graduate credit, and so we had 15 contact hours both in face-to-face and online venues. The textbooks that we used were the new Heinemann series of Wilhelm Smith and Fredrickson, What's Your Story, Get Her Done, and Oh Yeah. And the environment of the courses was very much like a summer institute, with writing into the day, plenty of writing workshop time, read-arounds, teacher demonstrations, peer response. I mean, we know that kind of an environment. And it was very important that the courses were not taught by me. I was the faculty of record, but the courses were taught by TCs. Kathy Kurtze, whom I previously mentioned, was the lead TC. She taught all 3 classes, had an opportunity to teach a graduate class, which was a first for her, and she was ably assisted by a few other TCs also. Janet Nyer from the Cadillac School served as tech liaison for all 3 courses, and then Kathy invited a high school teacher named Debbie Meister to be the assistant for the narrative class, Penny Liu, a middle school teacher, to be the assistant for the informative class, and Della King, an elementary teacher, to be the assistant for the persuasive class, and Della comes into play later on. So that was the mini course, and it took up the entire first segment of the grant, September, October, November, and then we wrapped it up just in time to leave for Boston last year for the National Writing Project meeting. So our timing was very good. The next activity was a VIP pass for our 7 cohort teachers to attend our annual MLK Day Writing Conference. As I said, it's an annual event. It's a great opportunity for us to showcase the work of our TCs and to and to invite area teachers and CMU students to come and have a day of professional development. This year, or this past year, excuse me, it was perfectly aligned with the mini courses, excuse me. The theme was exceeding the Common Core state standards, and our keynote speaker was Jim Frederickson, who was actually one of our textbook authors, and so that was very exciting. He spoke on narrative, theory, and pedagogy, and with VIP passes, our 7 cohort teachers were invited to, of course, participate in all of the conference activities, but also they were invited to a pre-conference reception for Jim the night before, and they also had lunch with him that day. So that was a nice touch too. And then our last activity was sort of the culmination of the first portion of the grant. We had a conference-style in-service day at Hillside with each of the 7 teachers dividing into grade-level teams and giving presentations to their colleagues. The day began with a keynote address by Troy Hicks, who came off of his sabbatical. So I'm sure Troy's out there, so a shout out to Troy, the linchpin of the CRWP. And he spoke on Google Docs, and interestingly, how we can apply Google Docs to close reading, not just collaborative writing. So that was very interesting. And then each of the different grade level teams chose a different anchor and a different activity. The day went very well, and they brought back their learning from the conference and from the mini courses to the staff, which was in keeping with the grant goals. So after we finished those 3 set activities, we planned an intentional mid-year pause, and this is really a very important feature of the grant that I want to pass on to new grant recipients. This mid-year pause was for a chance for us to stop activities, take stock, reflect upon what we had done in the past, and decide where we should go in the future. And in the grant application, we actually listed several options, many of them digitally oriented, since that's sort of the calling card of the CRWP, but they were just that, options, that was all. And I won't leave you in suspense. I will tell you right now that eventually we chose to focus on Lucy Calkins' Narrative Continuum, which is an online tool under construction. Calkins says it's a rough draft, but it's a fabulous tool designed to help students and teachers align themselves with the anchor standards for narrative writing. So imagine, if you're not familiar with the continuum, imagine a narrative continuum with the anchor standards for narrative grades K through 8 with 12 stopping points along the way. And in each stopping point, if you will, there is a student essay that's aligned to that point on the continuum. So an elementary teacher or middle school teacher could take an entire set of narratives and slot his or her students on that narrative just to see where they fall in terms of grade level expectations. That in and of itself would be very useful. But of course, there's always a teaching component with assessment, or there should be. And so also, teachers could look at where their students are right now and then decide what kinds of lessons and strategies can I use to help move my students up the continuum, up the ladder of the Common Core, so to speak. But you might wonder, well, how did we stumble upon that activity? What was it about the mid-year pause that helped us decide that path, if you will? Well, it was during that pause that I started to notice what I'm going to call PD fatigue among some of my cohort of 7 teachers. And I initially attributed it to the grant activities. The mini courses had been very intense, 3 solid weeks, September, October, November, really the entire fall. And even the conference style in-service day had been taxing to many of the teachers. They had never presented to their colleagues, and we know that's stressful, much easier to teach our students than to do a presentation in front of our colleagues. And so that's what I attributed the PD fatigue to. But I met with the principal, Andrea Andera, who is just an amazing woman, and she confirmed that there was PD fatigue, but it was not what I had anticipated. It was much more complex and even more widespread among the staff than I knew. What she told me was interesting. She said that Harrison and Hillside in particular had been on the receiving end of a lot of PD over the last several years. They had been given PD by different organizations, different consultants, different perspectives, and it seemed to her And she was very protective in the way she characterized her staff. She said it seemed to her that they were having to reinvent themselves with each new year, and that was exhausting to have to try on something new all the time, and that further it made assessment, and especially ongoing assessment, very, very difficult. So as I said, I was very touched by how protective and caring she was, the way she characterized her staff, and it brought to mind the feelings that I had as I watched the in-service, the conference-style in-service at the school. In that group, I saw a group of colleagues who were present, engaged, team-oriented, student-focused. There wasn't a curmudgeon in the group. I was very impressed with their professionalism and their drive, and it reminded me also of the way that Heather and Amy, the two SIs who attended our Summer Institute in 2013, raved about their staff and their principal. And by this time in the PD, we had actually already completed the required 35 or 40 hours, and so in some ways, we could have packed up and gone home, but there was no way we were going to do that. I wanted to be good stewards of our funds, and I believe there was more work we could do, but I knew that it could not be framed as something new or something different. It had to be something that would build on the existing content knowledge and pedagogical skills that the teachers had. And so the Calkins continuum, the narrative continuum, really fit the bill. When Kathy and I talked about it, looking back at the activities, we had started out with all three anchors: narrative, informative, and persuasive, and then Jim Frederickson had guided us to a more narrative focus. And during that time, I also learned that the teachers were very interested in having a youth camp that summer for at-risk kids with a focus on narrative writing. And also there was going to be a summer reading group of teachers working on Ralph Fletcher's What a Writer Needs, and that has a narrative focus too. And so it just seemed to me that this was the right choice. The focus was right, and it would also have teachers looking at their students' work, and that's what this staff really wanted to do, was work on their students' work. And so we talked with Andrea. She had 3 grade level PD days set up in April, and she was willing to share those PDs as part of the partnership. And so the 3rd grade team met 1 day in April, and then the 5th grade team, and then the 4th grade team. And those days varied. First of all, they were led by Kathy Kurtzy and Della King, the previously mentioned elementary school teacher. We knew it was very important that the teachers teach teachers, to follow through with that mantra, but also to have an elementary teacher involved. But each day was a little bit different. They all began, of course, with writing into the day and a careful look at the continuum and an opportunity to begin slotting some of their student writing on that continuum to familiarize themselves with a hands-on activity. But thereafter the activities varied. Some teachers thought they would like to work on a rubric. Others wanted to work on teaching lessons that would support narrative pedagogy. It just all depended. But in the end, and this was the exciting part, we knew that we had chosen an activity that was valued, because the teachers agreed at the last day of the school meeting to continue work on the narrative continuum the following year. Their focus at the time was to create kid-friendly language or rubric language, and I'm proud to say that a cohort of 5 teachers, not all part of the original 7, chose to meet over the summer to begin working on that language. They decided to focus on the rubric language to begin with, but plans are underway to continue with kid-friendly language and to eventually create a full narrative continuum that will be a PD tool for them and other districts in years to come. And so the work continues along those lines, but also in other ways it's possible that the teachers will present at the MLK Day conference, so we come full circle. And also the CRWP has just created a new blog called Teachers as Writers, and we're going to recruit them to write a blog post about the experience. And so all in all, as I said, it was a fabulous year. I think the takeaway lesson for people who are starting grants is in some ways very obvious. Be respectful of and responsive to teachers' needs. And of course, we all know that. But it really is true. And when I say the needs, I don't just mean pedagogical needs, although that's obviously very important. I also mean emotional needs, because teaching, as we know, is not a job, it's a calling. You can't take the human element out of teaching. And so the same thing is true with the grant activities. You cannot take the human element out of the grant activities. It was very important that we be mindful of the PD fatigue and responsive to it. And the best part is that if we are respectful and responsive to those needs, we reflect NWP values that we all hold dear, and also we help to build site capacity. This is our 5th year at the CRWP. We're marking an anniversary year. And we're a small site, and so site capacity is very important. We're confident that because of our seed grant activities that we are more likely to have hillside teachers in our future continuity events and summer institutes, so I think we'll see them again. Heather and Amy, the 2 SI graduates from 2013, are poised to lead PDs outside of their schools. And our current TCs, especially Kathy Kurtzy and all the other people I named, had a chance to teach a graduate level course. That is an incredible accomplishment. And we had a chance to work with the narrative continuum, which we can use in other districts. And I would add, if you'll humor me for just a moment, it was a huge growth opportunity for me. Troy, as I said, was on sabbatical, so I was the interim director. This grant was my first grant ever, and so I had the chance to co-author a grant with Troy and then to implement it. I had the chance to work with an elementary school, and that was very important to me as a secondary level person. And all in all, just had an amazing, wonderful year. I mean, the 5th year for the CRWP is a high point in lots of ways. But in a very solid year, the grant was the highest point of all. And so, again, I just thank you for the opportunity to share today, and wish the new seed grant recipients the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. That's an amazing testimony to the thoughtfulness that I think we're going to hear throughout. And I know the folks who are listening to this are, equally committed to the principle of learners at the center. It's what we do in our classrooms. It's what we know. Is at the heart of good teaching and learning everywhere. But I want to bring Dixie in here, because I know she will have something to say about this notion of responsiveness to needs, and I think it's a form of assessment. I think back to years and years ago, Nancy Atwell's getting down close to her students during writing workshop and saying, "How's it going?" And that comes in so many forms, but to be very deliberate, that principle really be at the heart. And I think that notion of the planned pause meant that from the very beginning, you saw a kind of "how's it going" opportunity at a defined midpoint. But I think Dixie will pick up on that in some of what she says in both with regard to students, checking in with students, and teachers. So Dixie, I'm going to ask you to jump in here now. Thanks so much, Liz.
Welcome.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Liz, for getting us started off. I did notice a lot of threads to our experiences as you spoke, so I really appreciate you sharing your experiences. First of all, let me share that the concern for teachers' welfare and what they're experiencing, not just in the classroom every day and the hard work that entails, but the atmosphere at the school and the district and at the state sometimes can have a very compelling effect on teachers. We walked into our experience, our partnership with this middle school. It's a 5th, 6th, and 7th grade middle school, where in our state we are a park state. And according to the park guidelines and the Race to the Top guidelines, our state shifted toward a new teacher assessment, a new teacher evaluation tool. That in itself is is intimidating for teachers, but also the percentage, the weight, the value of the state accountability test, which is now going to be the PARCC national exam, added value on this new document. So the teachers had spent some of their summer and the early parts of the 2013 fall being trained to PD fatigue level, I think, on this new instrument. And so they were pretty stressed out when we started working with them in October, but at the same time they were craving some authentic approaches to developing themselves, so that they want to be the best teachers possible on this new scale that they're being evaluated on. So they were craving some direction, and we too are a relatively new site. I had 2 excellent teacher facilitators that came in. We started off after doing an initial needs assessment early in the fall to see exactly what strategies or writing tools that they wanted to investigate. After we had a nice compilation, a nice list of strategies to facilitate, their literacy coach helped us with that. We did a day-long PD. We actually did 2 days with 2 separate groups, but it was the same content. In October, as soon as we heard about the grant, we started rocking and rolling, and October 15th, we were able to spend a day with teachers facilitating events on things like blogging, web quests, mini research projects, inquiry circles, and a lot of different formative assessment tools that would work in any content area. After that, our hope and belief was that the teachers would return to their classrooms, enact even just one different strategy or assessment, a way of using writing as a tool for learning, a new writing assignment, and then come back, and we had scheduled 4 teacher study groups in the afternoons for the teachers, and we used some of our grant money to pay a stipend for them to come for an hour after school on 4 different occasions. So the teacher study groups were very beneficial. We did a lot of assessment during the teacher study groups, and then right before we would leave, we would either have them write a response to the impact of the study group time together. Sometimes we would give them a little mini questionnaire. One day we did the 4 square handout that many of us are familiar with, and just reading some of the data that came from those formative assessments of the teachers, we found out from some of the artifacts and outcomes the teachers shared. One teacher had a student write a literary response about reading, gave them a rubric for evaluation, but instead of stopping it there, she used the rubric and added a self-assessment where the students would write what they would do better, and she allowed them to revise for a higher grade, and that was her first time to use writing as a tool for that. Some of the other things that were shared are in our Google Docs, but just very quickly. One of our later teacher study groups, the entire group said that it's a learning curve for them and for the students both. And they were speaking about just spending time writing intentionally and intensively and adding spurts of writing in a lot of different ways to their tasks. So those sorts of assessments really affirmed that the teachers were, maybe not all the teachers, we had 19 there again, but a lot of them were actually using some of the tools, finding their own from their own resources, and then they would come together and share their experiences, and the dialogue was just fabulous during those times together. Some teachers, a lot of the teachers were very scared about blogging, but we did have 4 or 5 that tried it out. They loved it. One of our teacher facilitators did an excellent job showing them several different forums for that, KidBlog being the main one. A lot of teachers didn't think that middle schoolers could blog, but one of our teacher facilitators was a 3rd grade teacher, and she blogs consistently. And so just, again, Liz noted this, having teachers share their experiences with other teachers is the most valuable way to do PD. I also want to bring in... I also want to bring in some information about a logic model that we developed, and that's available on the resources that you can access in this forum. But our logic model was just invaluable to me and to our facilitators because it kept us on track. And even though we customized and we changed some of the events and the features of the activities with the group, our logic model remained remained consistent. And all I had to do to use it as an assessment tool was turn it into a survey by adding a rating scale. And so on the logic model, the left column is the events that we enacted with the group for professional development. The middle is the impact on teacher practice. And the last column is what we all were hoping for, is an impact on student writing. And I even became very vulnerable here, and I shared the ratings on the resources that are available. We didn't receive what I would say really high ratings on student impact, but I was talking to Pat pretty thoroughly before we started this, and I think mostly the teachers were focusing on their professional practice more than they were on implementing, especially since we started in October. They were also dealing with the old state benchmark exam that came in April, and we're switching to PARC this next year. I mean, they really were overburdened with a lot of responsibilities and thinking about the district and the state atmosphere. So I don't know that our impact on student writing was as pervasive as we had hoped, but what I think, and this is also very helpful for being involved in the wonderful NWP community, just by talking to Liz and some of the others and Pat, I think what we're going to do is continue our work with the school, not on a paid basis. They've already shared that they don't have any funding to bring us back in next year. But I would love to set up a blog, like Liz mentioned before, but also have each teacher that's interested set up a survey or a questionnaire for the students and give it to them right now, and also maybe give it to them in December with questions specific to their research skills, their writing skills, and their blogging skills, and focusing on the career and college readiness aspect of the grant. So I think that's something that we may do once I talk to the teacher facilitators once more. School started this week, so things are really busy. Specifically, though, moving on from the assessment, one thing that came up in our dialogue before this webinar is that we really noted that in your grant, and this is for the to-be recipients, in the grant, don't be afraid to change some of your events, even if it involves a reallocation of the budget monies. Barbara Hasselbeck, if you just email her and describe what you'd like to do, she will let you know if it's appropriate and doable, and she responds very quickly. And that's one of the wonderful things about all the opportunities NWP gives us with the funding, is that usually what we want to do makes a lot of sense because we have those close connections with the schools and the districts. And so just ask, and they're there to help us, and they do a great job assisting us in that way. This was our first opportunity, and this is another reason why I love this grant. This was our first opportunity to actually be involved in PD in any school in our region. The first 5 years we have spent just putting people through our Summer Writing Institute and developing capacity. And we saw that we could do it. Just like Liz mentioned, the facilitators, Debbie West and Donna Dillahunty, they're just remarkable leaders of our site, and they were very excited and enthusiastic, and they built additional confidence working outside their grade level responsibilities. They benefited from watching the teachers bond and form not only a small network, but we opened them up to the whole NWP network, which all of us know is so valuable. And so those teachers are going back to school with really solid understandings of the writing workshop model. They want to do a writing marathon. They want to have an anthology in their school. So all of these are qualitative outcomes mostly related to the teachers, but the next big advancement for them is working with their student outcomes. And so I'm more and more excited about following up on that. Let's see. Real quickly, the kind of different assessments we used, we kind of just shaped it as we felt it was needed, but we had a listserv, so we got a lot of email dialogue back to the teachers, or from the teachers. We used quick questionnaires, verbal polls, a quick writing response, the Foursquare handout I mentioned, print surveys. We even reported to the school board actually last night. We were invited to share the outcomes of our grant at the school board meeting, and they thanked us, and the teachers that attended the week-long mini institute were there, and they were recognized, so that was really important. And you can look at all of our events again on the resources. Pat, is there anything else you'd like for me to talk about?
This is great, Dixie, and inspirational. You did mention in some of our earlier conversations about the impact of this work on your sense of the role of a director.
Oh, you're really making me be very vulnerable tonight.
You're with friends. We're with friends.
Well, just briefly, I was a teacher for 14 years, and I worked on my doctoral degree as I was a teacher, and I went straight to a university position, which was quite a culture shock. I'm still working on that, by the way. But I never lost that mentality of being a teacher, so I love doing PD. I love facilitating PD and hanging out with teachers and just sitting around a table and opening up discussions. I've always been really good at that, but as a university person, it's taken me 8 years for that really to shift, for me to adapt and to own that I need to do the budgets, I need to focus on the broad goals, I need to bring people together, and other people need to be facilitating because I'm no longer a teacher in the public schools. And that hurts my heart to some degree because I love that job. But I shifted to making the coffee, to typing up notes, to creating the surveys, and I let Debbie and Donna roll with the facilitation. And all of us agreed at the end of this whole experience. You know, first of all, I was very proud of them and shared that. And I told them, I said, I've just realized, you guys, that I don't need to facilitate anymore. And they're like, yay, good. And they clapped for me. And so I'm moving on and accepting my role. And it's also going to open the doors for a lot of our other TCs to take a leadership role in facilitation.
Thank you so much. Amy, let's bring you in here to connect to anything you've heard already and tell us a little bit about your work.
Okay. Well, I was very hands-off with this particular, because the people that were on the ground in the high-needs schools did such a terrific job of coordinating and carrying out the plan. So I'm sure there's something that I will miss that they did. But just to start with a little information about our partner school, it was Flatwoods Primary School in Lee County, Virginia. And if you're familiar with Virginia, we're Lee County, and that happens to be where I grew up, so I already had a lot of connections there. But that is the westernmost county on the very tip of Virginia. It's adjacent to eastern Kentucky. So it, in terms of central Appalachia, it's probably one of the most economically distressed areas. 70%, almost 70% of the students qualify for free or reduced lunch at Flatwoods Primary. The coal industry is shutting down, and that affects a lot of the other industries around it, so you have people leaving. But lots of challenges in the surrounding region. This is a school that goes from pre-K through 5th grades. There are approximately 390 students there with 30 faculty. They have been burdened with low test scores, and they just got a new principal who happens to be one of our TCs. So that was a good reason, another good reason to partner with this school. She came in to this school, she was appointed as principal, and she had been a reading specialist at another school in the county. And they thought that she might be able to help turn it around. So that also presented a challenge in that it was her first year. Her name is Dr. Renee Clark, and it was her first year as principal there. So she knew that she would have a lot on her plate, and she would need a team there to help carry this out. So when we started talking about the school and its needs and its challenges and how we could help, we thought, well, certainly PD is going to be an important part of it, because the staff there had not been engaged in PD. They simply don't have much in terms of resources, and they just hadn't been engaged in PD in a while. So she knew that had to be one of it. But we also knew that getting parents involved is very important in terms of literacy development. Getting parents as involved as possible, getting community involved, particularly in a school in that particular context. So we wondered how we could extend what we were doing in the classroom out into the community and really create a collaborative model that would get, so that the students would see literacy modeled all around them, that it wouldn't just be something that happens in the classroom. One of my areas of research is vernacular literacy, so I believe that what happens at home, the learning that takes place at home, is very important to what happens in the classroom. So we knew that could be something that would work. So we started our model with the question of how can we create a collaborative literacy effort between parents, teachers, and the community. So it fell into 3 parts. We wanted PD to be one part of it, and then we wanted to bring in a children's author who would work not just with the kids but also with the teachers and the parents to jumpstart an oral history project that would then bring in the community. So we began, we had a planning meeting in October. My in-service coordinator, Grace Bradshaw, came with me, and we sat down and we started to plan out the timeline. And Dr. Clark appointed Linda Woodward, who is a veteran teacher at that school, to sort of run the program there on site. Now, she is not a TC with us, but we had our eye on her, and we knew that she would be a good fit for the AWP, so we had site capacity in mind with this as well. We knew that there were some educators there that we wanted to bring into the site, and we feel certain that that will happen as a result of this. So in November, we started our PD series, and another thing is that we have a low number of elementary TCs at our site, and we really needed to increase those numbers. So that was another reason we wanted to focus on an elementary school. But we did have some people who were able to go in and do some PD with the FES teachers. We focused on literacy and research skills like interviewing, note-taking, process-oriented writing, multi-genre writing and research. iSearch, because we knew those types of literacy tasks would feed well into the oral history project later. In January, Georgella Lyon came in, and if you're familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with Georgella Lyon, but she lives in Kentucky. She's written, I think, over 30 books, lots of children's books. She's also written books of poetry. She's written novels. And she is the author of the famous I Am From prompt that we all use in writing projects. And so she came with her guitar, and she did these wonderful workshops with the students. She got them engaged in all kinds of different writing activities. The school offered refreshments during the evening workshops with parents, and teachers also came into those workshops. And I sat in on those, and I have to say that I was so inspired by Georgella's workshop, because she began with her childhood, and she really took us through her literacy development as a child and what influenced her and the kinds of writing that she began doing as a child to sort of help us remember, what that's like. She integrated music into her workshop, and then of course she had us do a collaborative I Am From poem. And the teachers wrote this wonderful poem, and they ended up publishing it, I think, on the school walls so that the students could read it. And they were very, very proud of that. And that was a good activity to get everybody involved in talking about writing and talking about the kinds of literacy influences that take place at home. Because in the I Am From poem, some of the people talked about what kinds of reading and writing they're from. Like my grandmother's recipe book. I'm from a front porch of storytellers who murmured into the gloaming as it settled over a cow pasture. Recipe books, and they talked about church, and they talked about all of these different places that influenced them. So teachers, during those workshops, teachers and parents engaged in roundtable discussions as well as the writing. And then they began preparations for the oral history project. So prior to Georgella's visit, all the students were given a copy of her book, Who Came Down That Road. If you're not familiar with the book, Who Came Down That Road, it's a children's book about all of the different people and then animals and then sea life that lived on a path that a little boy is walking, and he's wondering who came before him. And so that was a good anchor for the community project that the students would be engaged in. So what happened beginning around December is that they started to invite community members into the school, and the students, with the teacher's guidance, the students began to interview and take notes. And I'll just back up a minute and say that I know on one of my slides I think there's a picture of the students' journals. They kept these wonderful journals where they were doing what the teachers called authentic writing, and some of it they were doing in their own voices, in their authentic dialects, in their home dialects. So they were learning how to code shift from their dialects into formal English. Central Appalachian dialects are quite distinctive. They are full of very old linguistic artifacts. They're often stigmatized. And so that was something that we wanted to celebrate, but also teach in terms of the writing process. How do you shift from that spoken voice to that written voice, especially when you're taking down someone else's narrative and you're interpreting that story? Georgella has this wonderful essay she calls Voice Place, where she talks about the spiritual connection to one's home voice. And so that was very important to us that we address that and that we celebrate that as part of the students' culture. And so that's why we talked about authentic writing in those notebooks. So these student notebooks were also used for the interviews and the note-taking process. The students also did some creative writing in those notebooks from the I Am From prompt. And the community members who came into the school, they were doing an oral history project about the Flatwoods community. No one had ever done that before. And a lot of the community members who came in, because the school is very old, those same community members had gone to school there as children or had gone to high school there back when it was a high school. And so they didn't just talk about what school was like in particular decades. They talked about what it was like to live in the surrounding community, what it was like to walk to school, what it was like, you know, what kinds of things they had to do in the summer, you know, working in the fields and those kinds of things. And so it was really a good history lesson for the students as well. And I think it really made the community feel like a part of the school. You know, they reported that it was fulfilling to come in and engage with the students and engage with the teachers. So what they did, what the students did from that was they recorded the interviews, and then they were taught, and I think this really engaged them in some critical thinking, they were taught to do some interpretive writing based on the interviews. So what did you hear, and what does that mean in terms of the overall project? They integrated photographs, they integrated artwork into the project, all with, of course, teachers' guidance. And during this time, you know, teachers are talking with each other, and one of the outcomes, I know anecdotally, one of the outcomes is that Dr. Clark reported that the teachers were so excited about what was happening in their classrooms, and they were so excited about the students writing that they invited her to come and sit in on their classes constantly. Will you come and see what's happening in my classroom? We'd like you to come join our class today. She said they were constantly bringing writing samples to her. She wanted to, you know, they wanted her to see what was happening with student writing. So that was exciting. Just knowing that they were all engaged in this together. So what happened as a result was that students published the project, and it turned into a book. It looks like this. And everyone who participated was given a copy. All of the students were given a copy. They were able to autograph it and present it to their families and present it to the community members. And so that of all of the outcomes, they reported that was probably the biggest, because the students were so excited to be able to call themselves published authors, that they had something they could hold in their hands and say, I created this, you know, I helped write this. The media took up the story, published a couple of stories about it. We shared what was happening throughout the year on our Facebook page and on our website. I was able to talk about what was happening with the project in other venues at the college level. And I know that Dr. Clark and Linda has presented this for the school board, as well as a network of teachers and administrators from all over Southwest Virginia. I know that Linda presented this project in July in Abingdon, Virginia at the Higher Education Center for a large audience. So we were able to share what was happening. And one of the outcomes there was that another elementary school in the county with some of the same demographics and challenges as FES came to me in May and said, whatever's happening there, we want to be involved. We would love to work with the writing project, and we would love to be involved, and is there anything that you can do for us? So we said, sure. You know, we hadn't worked that out completely yet, but we did offer them a writing camp this summer, and we got a lot of kids from that school involved in a writing camp, so we got to know some of the staff there. The name, I'm hearing that some people want to know the name of Georgella's essay. It's called Voice Place. The essay is called Voice Place, and it can be found in two places. It can be found in a book called Bloodroot, and it can be found in a book called Talking Appalachian, Voice, Identity, and Community. It's a beautiful essay, beautiful essay. And so we plan to continue this work. We're not sure how yet, but we're gonna work with this additional elementary school. I know that I would like for the teachers at FES to collaborate with the faculty at the elementary school that approached us. We'd like to do some PD there, so we're working that out as well. We are fortunate to have another award by the Slimp Foundation that is set aside exclusively for young writers, and so we want to continue some more work with young writers using what we've learned from FES. And I know that FES is looking for resources so that they can continue what they started this past year with us. They're still very excited, morale is high, and they want to continue the work that they started. And I think one of the things I learned from this as a director is to give people room to develop their ideas and to let them go with it, because I really wanted them to have the room to explore and think about and own this project for themselves, and they did such a fantastic job. You know, my in-service coordinator helped with the scheduling, and my wonderful elementary level TCs developed the PD, but really it was wonderful to sort of sit back and see what this school could do if given the resources. And I have to echo what Liz and Dixie said about how wonderful the NWP folks can be. They'll help you at any given time that you need help. You know, my biggest challenge is budgeting and numbers and quantitative stuff, and they're always so patient with me and so helpful when it comes to that. And is there anything else I need to cover?
Dixie and Liz, if you want to jump in here and respond to anything. Before we do, because I think we'll have a few minutes for a conversation and to pick up on some threads, but it came just to say that in all of our wonderful planning conversations, which for me, Dixie, harkens back to that idea of, you know, wanting to be the facilitator, wanting to sit down at the table and talk to people about their work. The conversations with you are the part of the work that I love the most, hearing about what's going on at the ground level. But a thread that kind of went through all of your of what you had to say in our planning conversations was this notion of you wanted a plan that was flexible, that had a planned pause, or that had regular assessment and was responsive to at the moment. And that pushed up against the notion that you presented in your original proposal and your proposed budget, a plan. But I think what you're saying here is worth really highlighting, that what you submit is a proposal, and actually what you submit is a proposed budget, because we know that until you get on the ground and in the school and in the classroom, how could you possibly know what people need until you talk to them? So I think it's really important to emphasize that we assume that these are proposals, and some flexibility in that to adapt is really part of the work. I see that folks are asking for a glimpse, at least, of some of the writing in the publication from Amy's folks at Flatwoods. And just to say that there is a link in the resource folder, and that there's at least a picture. And I'm sure that we can talk with Amy about possibly getting some screenshots of samples up there available in the folder on demand afterwards. But I also wonder if we could focus in the last few minutes that remain, the looking at student writing. How did looking at student work in the classroom inform what teachers did? I mean, that's another feedback mechanism, another assessment mechanism. And anyone can jump in here. Amy, Liz, go ahead.
Sure. Actually, during most of the grant activities, we were not looking at student. Focus was really on teachers and their professional development. However, at the end of our grant activities, when we focused on the narrative continuum, that gave us a chance to begin looking more closely at student work, and it was illuminating. I don't have the continuum work in front of me at this moment, so I can't talk in very specific terms, but that's where it seemed to me that everything really came together for the teachers and catapulted them to want to continue doing the assessment work, using the continuum tool. And so if I were doing it all over, I think we would have done that continuum work a little bit earlier in the grant activities. So that's a starting point for us.
Thanks. And Dixie, you talked about the logic model, and the column on the right in the logic model, which is available in the folder of resources for Arkansas Delta, that the focus is on student outcomes. And you talked a little bit about what was possible within the year and the ways in which you heard teachers ready to pick up on that in the coming year. Can you just say in the minute or so that remains a little bit more about that?
It's kind of like, does the chicken come before the egg? One thing that we dealt with is that I'm not sure to what extent the teachers, all of the teachers at least that we worked with, valued writing on the level of an NWP teacher who's been through a 3-week summer institute. And so we were hoping that the short PDs would fuel them in that direction, and it did. But it wasn't until the summer mini institute where the teachers really developed themselves as writers and developed their anthology, and they actually had models of their writing to take back for this coming school year. So they're very excited to share themselves as writers with their students now. Some of them are journaling, and they've never done that before. So like Liz, we think that the teachers as writers is leading toward more enhanced student outcomes. And that's why if you look at our results, that last impact on student practice was lower than the impact on teacher practice at this time. So sometimes the grant activities are going to take longer than the span of the grant time. And we all know that change takes time. So we are going to follow up, and I think that's something important to note, that even after the grant is ended, you're going to probably need to follow up and check in and discuss and sit around a table with the teachers and find out if they need something else or how it's going.
Thank you. And Amy, a last word?
Well, as I said before, I just think that in our case, because teachers were still adjusting to changes in their school, we probably had more results with student outcomes in that regard. But I still think all in all it was successful, but just simply because we had everybody writing together.
Thank you all so much. We will, we'll talk a little bit, we'll debrief among ourselves and talk about whether or not there are additional resources. I know that there's been an active conversation going on in the chat room on the webinar homepage, so we'll be eager to see that. And again, thank you so much. And as Liz opened by saying, best of luck to all of you who are embarking on a new year of professional development. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.